And we're back at it again, tracking further down into history's depths, I would say. We went to World War II, and now we're going to go even further. But first, a sincere apology to people that listen. So I like to listen to the podcast myself, and admittedly, I'd only listened to our second most recent episode. And I swear, I said, probably 8 billion times, and I cringed up after the second one, and I was like, oh no, here I go again. And sure enough, it just kept happening and happening. And I get it. I get why. It's a good space filler, silence filler. And in my mind, I was like, oh, I'm nailing this thing. I'm talking passionate about stuff I'm interested in. I'm nailing this podcast thing. And then I listened back and I was like, oh, wow. Wowie, wow.
I don't gotta like that, like I thought I did.
No, it's not great. It's not. But
I thought you were about to issue an apology because of misleading or incorrect information. But this is really an apology on behalf of the entertainment value of the pod.
All the information that I bring to this podcast is...
That's what I'm talking about.
Factual, credible.
AF, dude.
100%.
Same.
You must believe it at all times.
Never made a mistake.
In fact, I'm the only person that's ever been right ever.
And me. I'm also always right.
No, that I literally just said just
I know for a fact I'm always right.
Okay.
This is the I party scene from Hot Rod.
Yes.
Okay, so this is right on topic, Austin. I actually also have a correction to issue. I said that German gunsmiths and gun designers were inspired John Moses Browning. Totally the opposite. I had it exactly flipped. Other way around, I meant to say that they iterated on the designs of John Moses Browning to create things like the MG42. I said the 32 also. I know you did. 10 off there. So those were two infractions. I hope the greater community of the world can forgive me. I've been reached out to by multiple parties, received multiple death threats, and they're all deserved. More death threats than I normally get. So it was
right. So
it was a tough time. It was a tough time for Dweeb Dive Nation. This was almost as bad as the Kevin scandal. Was it Kevin? Andrew? The Andrew scandal.
Well, there were a lot of mispronunciations, but I was mid-sentence trying to say something. I was going to say mispronunciation.
You had no hope. You had no hope of bringing that one home. I'm sorry.
Dude, it's because you cut me off, man. I'm never wrong.
My bad. Go ahead.
But it was other names. I want to say, for people that are wondering what we're talking about, we had an earlier iteration of a podcast years ago, actually years ago, which is weird to say, that was more centered on nerdy entertainment, and
correct.
It was tough to keep up on, which was one of the many reasons that we stopped/switched. But I think the biggest thing that you are referring to is when we were talking about The Witcher, and I was talking about Geralt, and I said like Jared or
Garrett. You said
Garrett. That's right. I said Garrett. Yeah.
Sorry, this is me pulling focus on my camera. It doesn't.
But the other thing, I think Andrew was my wedding, because I got married during not during a recording, but basically my wife and I went up to our room, and they had, there's my first one, so that's it. I just heard it. I heard myself say it. But they had a little bucket of champagne, 2 glasses, some strawberry covered in chocolate, and on it said fucking Andrew and Jacqueline. And I'm like, who the fuck is that? That's not me. Is this real?
Baby, who the fuck? Who's Andrew?
I took a picture and I sent it to Connor, who...
It's still on the Instagram.
Was en route at that time. But yeah, that's the Andrew one.
It's beautiful.
Somehow that happened to me. We had not a lot of trouble with the venue stuff. A lot of people have trouble with wedding stuff, but they were trying to do their best to, what's the word?
Accommodate, make you feel at home,
make up for a little bit, and they misfired pretty hard on that one.
Made it even worse.
I didn't even say anything. I was like, whatever. I don't even care. Just don't give them anything else.
Yeah, you're the guy anyway. You don't matter nearly as much.
That's right. I don't.
You're not an A-lister on that day.
I was there for pictures.
Solidly C+ list.
Yeah.
About the best you can do.
Pretty much. Much.
Should we pop the top on this topic, Austin? Do you want to stop the podcast after I made that joke?
Yeah.
Should we just stop? All right, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in. This has been Dweeb Dive. This is our last episode on air. I'm going into voluntary exile immediately following this recording. Austin, it's been good, man. You're one hell of a co-host. But I think I'll peace out. I'll take my leave. You can do this one solo.
All right. Very good. Thank goodness. Because that was a rough one to sit through. The 2 seconds that it lasted. Let's pop the top off.
I hope my mic picked that up so the comedic weight of that actually hits.
Ay. But yeah, an interesting topic to say the least.
Mm-hmm.
Brought about really because of would you call it a meme? Or was it more of like a movement?
A meme of phenomenon, if you will. Yes.
A meme-nomenon.
Well done. Two killer jokes in a row. Wow. Ladies and gentlemen, you are welcome to the premium Patreon version of Dweeb Dive, where only the best jokes are discussed and offered to the public. All right, for the one viewer maybe that's still listening at this point, we were entranced by the idea of the Roman Empire and that meme, the meme-omenon, can't even say it, that Austin just mentioned, as I'm sure you're aware, was the fact that men are thinking about the Roman Empire 2, 3, 4, 5 times a week. Some of us every day. Now, it's funny. I think we don't have to do a deep context about the Roman Empire is very present in our society. I think for most people that comes about in myth and legend about the Roman legion. That seems to be the major cultural element that is continually at play in movies, books. Most fantasy books have some sort of faction that's like a legion or built after the Roman Empire. Blah, 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 blah. It's very ubiquitous. I think we all know that. But at least I don't know what your objective for this episode is, but mine is kind of to say there's a lot more to the Roman machine that made its way into modern society than I think even the Roman Empire doesn't get credit for, despite them getting credit for a lot of things and they're very popular. But I think there's more subtle and I guess you could even say more mundane things that have really come to term in the modern age. Plus, there's they were a fallible civilization. They were just like us. They had tons and tons of problems. So I also kind of want to, I think later on I want to sort of temper some of the myth and some of the legend of the Roman Empire as well. Because that's of great interest to me. But yeah, I mean, look, girls, you guys were right. We do be thinking about the Roman Empire all the time, but it's deeper It's deeper than guys with swords and shields going at it. Okay? That's why we're here.
I think it's important to note that this Minan, I can't even say my own word.
Oh my God, don't do it again.
I can't do it. I'm not even going to try.
It's bad for me
I'm not even going to try. But this movement, if you will, made it was like a national thing. I was watching a college football game and I heard the announcers saying, well, how often do you think about the Roman Empire? And I think it's also important to note that we have a group chat of Connor, myself, some other friends, and our wives, girlfriends, fiancés, etc. Kind of like a large just group chat that we can chitty chat in for fun, for shits and giggles.
Right.
And that question was also brought up within this group chat. And I think it was before I even really knew about this. Me, mom, and non. Yeah.
Nice. Fifth time's the charm.
Because the question was posed, how often do you think about the Roman Empire? And I was like, well, that's kind of a weird question, but I really sat down to think about it. I was like, probably a decent amount, because they kind of did a lot of, they did a lot of stuff for us. And then I heard it on the college football game and I was like, oh, so this is like a thing. And then I started to see it more on X and everything. And I realized, okay, yeah, this is, for whatever reason, the Roman Empire flashed in the pan and we were talking about it, which is ironic because just in itself, flashing in the pan, if you will, is enough to say, what other civilization does this? I can't think of any. The Roman Empire is obviously very special to make it into this kind of context in our information age. But I guess as far as an objective, my objective never changes on this podcast. And that objective is always to bring things to the table that maybe have not been considered in the past and spin the wheels. Just get those things turning and just make people think about the context, the information, the whatever we're presenting or talking about, to just kind of just get that going a little bit, because I think we get a lot of stuff presented to us now and it's just one of those take it or leave it type things. It's kind of bowed up for us already, so we just consume it immediately and move on to the next thing that we're going to consume. And I just think it's better for people to take stuff in, but it's not enough. It's something that's going to spur on further interest, discussion, whatever. And that's my objective on every podcast that we record, from our first 2 episodes to this one, to our future ones. That's always what I want to do, because I think that makes it more fun for everybody.
Right.
Myself, Connor, listeners, viewers, whatever. If you're just listening to us and it's a yes or no, I agree with you, I don't agree with you, then you probably won't listen very much. Maybe 1, 2, something piques your interest. But
yeah,
if we continually challenge you or ourselves or both to push the status quo of information that we intake, and it just makes us think about it over and over and over, deep dive, all the different things, then that means I'm excited for the next one, because it's something I've never heard about before. It's something I have heard about before. It's something I care about, don't care about, but it's going to make me think about it in a way I've never thought about before. If that's, I've never thought about the Roman Empire before, or I know about certain things because have a map, I went to school, and I've heard of the city of Rome.
Yeah.
So that's my second time saying, which is okay. I'm going to keep track of it because I'm really going to try hard to
I might put a counter in the corner.
I really thought about in the second episode of mentioning something. Obviously I'm mentioning it now, but it was a lot. It was a lot. Too much. But yeah, so that's the objective. So there's never a centralized, this is my information I'm going to present to you, take it or leave it, let's just talk about it. Let's have this discussion, because the Roman Empire is incredibly interesting. And if you really, really, really think hard on it and think back to it and then think about today, like you said, Connor, how we have our certain things that we attribute immediately. Okay, yes, Roman Empire, nailed it, bang. But I just don't think we think about it enough, the impact on almost every level of organized society that the Roman Empire had. And there's been civilizations before the Roman Empire that certainly have played their part, the Romans themselves being influenced by the Greeks. But I think the Roman Empire was the civilization that really laid the foundation for almost a standardizing of civilization in general. Now, obviously, it's
that's
changed.
Standardizing is a great word.
But
I think that's probably the most accurate way to describe them, is they sort of are the de facto template, at least of Western societies, but many aspects of any society as well. And it's funny because if you look up influential civilizations, obviously Rome comes up, but you get the Indus River civilization, the Tamil kings, you get the Sengoku Jidai period of Japan. There's plenty of like world-spanning cultures, or cultures that had elements span the world. There's plenty of them. There's tons of them. But most people haven't heard of the Tamil kings or the Indus River civilization because they just weren't at the center of the world. And that's kind of the crazy part about Rome, is they happen to be one of these like tier 1 societies, but they also happen to be at the center of pretty much the populated known world at the time. And being that geographical center, having temperate weather, tons and tons of water access to a body of water that serviced the rest of pretty much the known world at the time, there's just no comparison. It was the perfect hotbed for something like Rome to appear, and they made it happen. The Etruscans, that is, and other cultures, but mainly the Etruscans. And like, I don't even know where to start with these guys. I kind of want to start with the fact that 1,000 years of provable Rome was around. I love contrasting the 1,000-year domain of the Roman Empire, arguably more, arguably less, but 1,000 is a good number, versus like America. What are we at? 340 something?
For our existence?
Since 1776.
I thought we just recently celebrated the bicentennial. We're not in the 300s yet.
Oh wait, sorry. Did I say 340?
Yeah.
I think I meant 240.
I was gonna say we have not been around that long.
Podcast over. Yeah, okay, 240, because I think we're 243 or 44. Okay.
I'm never wrong. Just that's cruise.
Correct. That's correct.
More
anyway,
to the point.
Podcast is in shambles already, but contrast that, the length of our nation, with a single period of the Roman Empire. They've got multiple periods. So like they have a period called the Pax Romana, which is seen as, it just means like Roman peace. It's seen as their greatest cultural expansion, their greatest levels of commerce, and all of like the classical poetry, Homer. You have like a lot of their architectural feats. It all came out of the Pax Romana. That period of goodness lasted 200 years, the majority of our country's runtime, which is crazy. On top of everything else we're about to discuss, I think that's a good way to sort of segue into the rest of the pod, is they weren't messing around. And like you said, this phenomenon in our culture today was a flash in the pan. In a historical context, they were the opposite of a flash in the pan. They saw the rise and fall of so many things around them, and yet they stayed true. And they didn't really die. I mean, yes, the Byzantine Empire happened, and then the split of the Roman Empire happened, and then everything kind of became city-states and became its own thing. But like the core of Rome is still in Italy, is still celebrated by Roman people, or the descendants of Roman people, and it's still maintained by those people, just their descendants. So, in a way, they're still around, literally, and obviously, as we're about to discuss, they're around in a ton of other ways too. But I don't know what are you itching to start with? Because like I'm kind of at a loss.
So first I'll say bookmark that little piece. What happened to the Roman Empire? We'll bookmark that because I have a question to pose to gather your thoughts and just in general turn the cogs on everybody else that's listening. So we'll save that.
I know where you're going with that. Okay,
a little bit. I think you might, but maybe you don't. Then before we really also kick off, so the origins of Rome, do you put any stock in basically the creation of Rome? I'm not talking about the Romulus and Remus wolf thing, myth. I'm talking about I'm talking about Troy, the fall of Troy, the Trojan horse, all that stuff.
Yeah.
And the people that escaped, the Greeks. It's kind of funny because
like proto-Greeks at that point.
If you watch the movie Troy, it's an old one with Eric Bana and Brad Pitt. It's pretty good.
So good. So good.
At the very end of the movie, when the Greeks are sacking the city of Troy, which we have found out to be real. We thought it was fake and mythical for a long time, and then they found it. Mm-hmm. I think a lot of people have heard of the Trojan horse at least, so it's a condom brand, so everybody's heard of it.
What a disappointment that must be to the ancestors that built the Trojan horse. Sorry.
I mean, the only thing I'm going to say about it is just think about it. What the Trojan horse was.
I know, it's a beautiful allegory. They perfectly recruited the concept of the Trojan horse. I just mean for such a momentous historical event to be diluted through the eras into a condom brand. Somebody's rolling over in their grave. That's all I'm saying.
Or they're like, that makes sense. Sneaking a bunch of men into a stronghold. Yeah. In a big wooden horse, and then you shrink it down to sneak a bunch of guys into another place. Ish. All right, I'm done. That's it. That was gross. Well done. Okay.
3 for 3 on bits, by the way, buddy.
I know.
3 for 3.
But before we get too sidetracked, so in that movie, I think it's Prince. Like the younger brother, the dweeby one, at least the one they make dweeby in the
movie.
Of
the princes of Troy, you're saying?
Yes. He's given the sword of Troy and is told, I want to say it was like Aeneas, but don't quote me on that because I'm not 100% sure. So this prince gets the sword of Troy, and is, in the movie anyway, is basically told, the heart of Troy, the city of Troy, can never die as long as one of its people carries this sword. And off they go to live. So I have heard that those people that fled Troy actually became the Romans. That was the start of the Romans. Like the very, very beginning part of Rome was those people. That's how Rome just started. Is these people from Troy.
I'm not familiar with this particular theory.
Oh, really? Okay.
I'm not at all. I mean, I know the basics of what is now Italy in the pre-Roman era. The Etruscans were mainly an agricultural society, pretty sparsely populated. That's about what I know. In terms of whatever impetus started the founding of Rome, I have no idea. And you're saying that the refugees from the Trojan War became Romans?
They were they created Rome essentially. It's it's just something interesting to think about because, I don't know exactly from a timeline standpoint, and I think it's pretty obvious that these refugees didn't just leave the ruins of Troy and instantly create Rome. I think there would have been a period of time of traveling and trying to find a new place to live and all these different things. But that is something that I have heard before, and I think that's why it's kind of documented in that movie. Again, it's a Hollywood movie, take it for what you will. I'm not saying it's factual and I'm basing this rumor off the movie, but that part of the movie where the dad hands the sword off to his son.
Is it Orlando Bloom?
Yeah.
Oh, it's Paris.
Paris? Is it Paris? Okay.
There's 3 sons in reality, but I think they only depicted Paris in the movie or something like that. But yeah,
so you know what? I don't think it was Paris. I think it was maybe someone else. I think the person's name was Aeneas. And anyway,
I don't remember the movie at all.
Yeah, it's been a really long time. But anyway, so I was just curious if you had heard that before, or if not, maybe that rabbit hole's not that deep. Maybe it's been debunked, but I have heard of that particular part of Rome being the starting place.
Well, here's the thing, is like, from what I remember, and this is knowledge holding on by a thread now in my brain. It's ancient. But as I recall, the Etruscans inhabited what is now the Italian peninsula, but they did not found Rome. They did not decide to found it, and it didn't like organically arise out of the Etruscan civilization necessarily. As I recall, they were sort of replaced. I don't think they were driven out wholesale. It wasn't like a complete genocide or cultural replacement. I think that they bowed down sort of to another culture moving in. It was sort of a passive takeover, if I recall. That could very well be what you're speaking towards, and maybe that's the thing that's disputed as like, okay, well then who was it who came in and sort of like what new culture arrived and did that? I'm almost certain that's kind of where your theory is coming into play, and I'm calling it your theory just because I'm unfamiliar with it, but that's interesting. It's interesting that Rome was a product of sort of a transient group or a displaced group. It's easy to forget that at the completion of a conflict, of a war, if it's not a complete and total genocide, which there, believe it or not, is typically not how wars are concluded, you have an entire cultural group, usually a huge one, if it's the sacking of a giant city. Those people all have to go somewhere if they're not integrating with whoever the dominant faction was. So it's an interesting point, because they would have to go somewhere or do something else if they weren't cool with, occupation. So
the Greeks wouldn't have accepted them. Obviously, they were
a little bit of a blood feud,
slaughter them. But anyway, so that was just a little interesting piece I wanted to bring up before we kicked off our discussions of Rome, because I find it interesting, and it's one of those things that you have a displaced people with maybe more general knowledge about civilization and how to organize themselves, military, all these different things. And if what you're saying is there's basically a farming people in Italy at the time, and it's like, well, how did they go from that to the creation of the starting point of Rome? Then it makes sense. Again, I'm sure there's multiple historical documents, historians that can document the starting place of Rome. I feel like the reason I'm bringing this up is because I personally have not heard a solid one theory debunks all. This is how it works. This is what it does, etc. For the origin, Rome's origin. Obviously, I've heard the Romulus Remus. If you're not familiar with that, that's the story of two boys lost in the wilderness that live off a wolf. A wolf basically takes them in as cubs or pups. I guess it would be pups. whatever the term is, and they then grow up and create Rome. So I guess you can choose.
There's like some sort of, there's like a binary sort of, it's mostly a myth that was taught to provide some exclamation or some story about the creation of Rome, but it also was sort of a parable between the dynamics of Romulus and Remus. About one was more foolhardy and brash, and the other was more conservative. Blah 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 blah. It's one of two possible origins for like being raised by wolves. By the way, the other possible origin of that comes from Nordic cultures, which is kind of cool. Considering that Nordic ancestors and then the Roman army did eventually clash in Europe later on, but that's besides the point. If you're wondering, like, wait, the Roman Empire was so ubiquitous, why don't we know a ton about its origins and know as much as we know about Damascus or Tokyo or something like that? The reason is, it's not because Rome wasn't well documented. It obviously is. It's because Rome lasted so long. It lasted so long, it's been around forever, that the far end of that is, some of that is prehistory, or right around the time when history was being established as a concept. So that's why we don't know everything there is to know about how Rome started. I have to defer to Austin's factoids on this, at least at this specific part, because I don't really know. I've never really heard much more than that.
Yeah, it's just interesting. Like I said, trying to...
It was aliens.
Right, yeah. That's actually what I meant when I was talking about the cool...
Rome is short for ROM, which is... Now, I was trying to think of an abbreviation that had incorporated aliens. I couldn't do it.
That's okay.
4 for 4 bits, bit counter, 100%.
So, when we talk about Rome, and you highlighted it earlier, where do you even begin to talk about this empire, if you will? I think for me, it's probably would be within your Pax Romana time frame, just the period of time where Rome was, and correct me if I'm wrong, when Rome was at its largest, basically controlled the world at this time. There was...
Not its most widespread, but at its largest in terms of population. Yeah.
So
and landmass, yeah.
So I'm thinking, in my mind, that's me thinking they were into modern day Germany, all of Spain, France, England.
Fact checking you.
Rome, I mean, that's fine. Rome founded London, which is cool, crazy. They were in North Africa, Sicily, into the Middle East, Syria, the Holy Land that we've come to know it by today's terms, is basically anywhere the Mediterranean Sea touched was Roman territory, is what I'm talking about.
Go inland at least a few miles, if not way more, on any of the border around this, and that's, yeah, correct.
Yeah.
It's like a paintbrush along the coastline. That was basically their empire.
Yeah, and then also, like I said, including what is now known as Great Britain, the Romans were also
You are correct about
there.
The expansion to Britain, by the way. That was during the Pax Romana. Somebody passed AP history. Let's go.
No, but I just think, so when I think about that territory, the sheer volume and miles and people and everything that entails to just hold that together. And Connor, you said like 200 years ish of peace with that territory. That is a long freaking time to hold that amount of land stable, like, you know, stability wise,
relatively peacefully too.
Peaceful. You're just living your life. That's 2 generations of people in a family, which is just crazy for me to think about. So that's kind of why, or what I want to talk about, because it's like, how is that even possible that they can do this? That an empire of this size could control so much territory with so many diverse cultures and people and come out on top for the most part. Obviously, the Roman Empire no longer exists, or so we think. That's the other thing I'm going to talk about.
In its classical arrangement, yes.
Correct. But and what comes out of Rome, I would presume during this time, because when people stop fighting each other and there's plenty of food and order and all these different things, then that's when the development really starts churning forward. I think we've kind of made a point and talked about this before, but that's where I want to focus in, because that's where I think most of the influences come from. And it's just so interesting. The more I thought about it, the more I briefly looked into it and what has kind of come out of it. And then you just think about it in general as well. You just hear little different things about the Roman Empire, and it really strikes you how much influence they had on the rest of the world, whether they knew it or not. And it's just incredible to think that Western culture is heavily, not dictated, but you can see the paintbrush strokes of Rome all over it, even all the way up to today, through whether it's language, agriculture, the judicial system, politics, art, architecture, engineering,
law, thought, philosophy.
I mean,
the medical system, plumbing, you name it.
It's just incredible to really, really think about all of that information it just comes out of one place. It came out of one place. And it's crazy to think about, while they kept getting things right, obviously they got a lot of things wrong, which led to the downfall. A lot of it being who was in charge. They never had a really good system in place for...
A little bit of a coin flip.
Right, for who would lead Rome, despite the republic and senators and what you could call a Congress or Parliament. There were still powerful pieces in play that could overrule them, much like today, but less checks and balances, obviously, during that time to overrule the one powerful piece, and thus the downward spiral of Rome, plus all these other things. But anyway, so that's what I'm going to bring to the table, I suppose I could say. We can either, Connor, I know you had some stuff specifically prepared, and I don't know if you shifted from your original thought process for this. Either way, I'm interested, because Rome has such a great in-depth history, and I think what you were going to talk about had an influence on Rome itself again, but whether or not you've changed, I don't know. But
I've had a lot of over my life, I've always been interested in little snippets of Roman culture outside. I would say my main focus was the Legion. Like most boys, it's cool. I think we all know it's cool. But my interest really expanded to a lot of, again, these so-called mundane things that came across. But I feel like it's very easy to paint the Roman people as some sort of superior society or some kind of peerless note in history that, they were bright, shining stars that were, eventually brought down by all of their dissenters, and everybody around them was coming for the crown, that sort of idea. Some of that's true. But a lot of the problems that came towards the later eras of the Roman Empire were sort of caused by their own folly, as a matter of becoming kind of too big for their own britches, for anybody's britches. I mean, they were the biggest culture at the time. And as we see plenty of times in modern governments, when you become a certain size, when your economy becomes a certain size, the reach and vastness of your your military and the areas it's sworn to protect, how far-reaching your culture goes, and how wide you want to spread your money and your resources and things like that. Obviously, things can begin to fall apart. Weirdly enough, although we attribute most of that fall off towards the end of the Roman culture, they did have a ton of stumbling blocks, tons of times where the integrity of the core of the empire was severely threatened. And that's the first thing I want to talk about. So you may have heard of a little guy named Hannibal Barca, mostly known as Hannibal. Not Hannibal Lecter, the guy that eats your liver with fava beans and a nice Chianti or whatever he says, but
it rubs the lotion on its
skin.
Sorry.
Wow. Great film. Yes. Hannibal Barca was the son of a guy named Hamilcar, who was you could call him the lead general of Carthage. Carthage being a city on the northern coast of Africa that was originally founded as part of the Phoenician Empire. And if you're like,
who the hell is the Phoenician Empire? I've never even heard that name before.
Have you ever heard of it's like a concept that happens a lot in the history of the world and everyday life. There's someone who almost attains something, who like almost gets there, and then they get snuffed out and fall apart, and then the next person in line actually continues and creates the legacy that they were shooting for. That's who the Phoenicians were to the Roman Empire. They did everything the Romans were trying to do and just barely got outcompeted because their life cycle got way too big, way too fast. So before the Roman Empire was going around cracking skulls, imposing taxes, and making the rest of the Mediterranean and the surrounding environs part of their empire, the Phoenicians were doing it first. They had the largest fleet of merchant and military ships at that point in history. They set up all of the known trade routes, or popularized and made known to the rest of the world all of these trade routes throughout the Mediterranean and even a little bit further. They founded the city of Carthage. It was one of their many stops. Because Carthage was so far away on the other side of the thick part of the Mediterranean, all the way in the northern part of Africa, it really developed its own culture. When the Phoenicians went away, Carthage and many of their settlements and colonies did not go away. They kind of retained that bit of Phoenician heritage, of that pride, and really as these super empires started spreading around, whether it was the Greeks or the Romans, they held on to their individualism. That's kind of where we enter the Punic Wars. Carthage and Rome. Yeah, go ahead.
Before you jump into the Punic Wars, are the Phoenicians, aren't they credited with basically standardizing language because they were so
widespread
within their merchant?
That is one of their legacies, yeah.
I'm sourcing this from, don't laugh too hard,
it's a video game,
the Disney World ride at Epcot that I've ridden probably 16 bazillion times.
Really?
Because my wife is a big Disney fan. It's called Spaceship Earth. It's basically it's in the big ball at Epcot. It's maybe not in it, or maybe it is. I don't really know. But it's called Spaceship Earth, and it kind of takes you through a brief timeline of human history. You know, the Egyptians, papyrus, paper, that type of thing. And the Phoenicians, I think I already knew this before the ride, but I think it's just funny because we're talking about it. At Disney World, in the ride, it's basically crediting the Phoenicians with standardizing a singular language because they interacted and traded with every single culture in the Mediterranean who all had their own languages. There's no way to communicate with anybody to understand what you were saying.
That's correct.
And because the Phoenicians were in contact with everybody, they basically standardized a language so everybody understood what was being said, done, etc., and they could continue to trade probably fairly or whatever. Probably makes it a lot easier when you're asking for something and, you know, you're calling it the same thing and it's not.
Ding! Ding!
Right,
Ding,
yeah.
he said, you know. He said, you know, folks. I lost count, by the way.
That's only 3. That's only 3. But I just wanted to, I swear. Okay. That's the only one that I've missed.
The video will reveal all, brother. So
I know
you can
it will.
continue on. We'll see what happens.
I know it will. But yeah, I was going to say, before you jumped into the Punic War part, I just wanted to put that tidbit in because that's the Phoenicians
perfect.
From like a ground level, I'm not a big history person, type person if you're listening. Why are they Phoenicians important? Why do they have significance to what Connor's about to talk about? And how they are so powerful at this point is because they're descendants of this culture, and this culture is what brought standardized language to the world at this time, at least in the West. So kind of important.
They're often credited with that, yes. I don't know if it's 100% this is the first successful attempt at it. But yes, that is associated with them. And for that exact reason, I'm actually glad you brought this up. They are sometimes credited with the first attempt at a standardized postal service based on the fact that they had a standardized language, but they didn't quite last long enough to really receive that laurel. And guess who did? The Roman Empire.
I was about to say
they were the first people to really establish a real long-lasting postal service that was built on the back of a standardized language requirement for all of their colonies and settlements and territories.
And
so there you go.
Rome standardized a language that still has roots today. So Latin.
Bada bing, bada boom.
It all connects.
The Romance language, baby.
Yeah, literally. So
I used to think that meant. I used to think that meant like the language of seduction, like that kind of romance. It's not. Sadly, it's not.
It's.
I wanted to learn Latin as a kid
Roman
because
Empire.
I was trying to up my game, and my dad's like, "That's not what that means, bro." Shut me down pretty hard. So the Punic Wars, I won't give you too much context. They start like most wars start. There was a land dispute that Rome wanted and Carthage wanted. Carthage already had its individualism, its descent of the world power at the time. They were very wary of each other. And both sides likely knew that if they tried to stake claims on land, on this particular piece of land, that war would break out, and it did. Hamilcar, the first generation of this war, was soundly defeated at most points by Rome. On land, on sea, didn't really work out for them. They signed a super costly treaty that was just taxing the hell out of Carthage for about 10 to 15 years, if I recall. Not dissimilar from our last podcast with the fallout of the First World War for Germany. They lost. They signed an extremely costly agreement where they were paying out the cost of war for the next decade or so. Hamilcar's son, Hannibal Barca, is like, Dad, you're a cool guy, but you're not him. I'm him. I'm going to do it. Hannibal goes out there and starts this huge campaign against Rome at a ton of their secondary settlements and territories up to Spain, up the other coast of the Mediterranean, doing a strategy of ambushing. This dude wrote the book on what it means to spring an ambush. Hannibal's campaigns were characterized by 3 main things. Number 1, dude was outnumbered every single time. There is not a singer... Oh, no.
Not a singer?
That was the most Asian thing I've done in a really long time. There was not a single major battle that he was involved in. I got it. We did it.
Nice.
Where he wasn't outnumbered. Most of the time, roughly about 2-1. Number 2, he had no supply lines. Or at least in the later stages of the Punic Wars, he had no supply lines. He was doing everything based on what he could pillage and what he could scrape by and what deals he could make while he's basically on the road. Number 3, the dude had to counter the most effective professional fighting force in the world at the time, who had siege weaponry. So the idea of siege engines, fighting formations, way better equipment for the most part. And besides a couple of X factors he basically had every disadvantage you could think of. So how did this translate into a full-scale conflict with the greatest army in the world at the time? Dude almost won. The guy almost won. He took the fight to him all the way to the north, the frozen north, crossing the mountains, crossing the Alps. The guy did not have any supply lines after about Spain, about the mid-level of Spain. After he went up that way, it was over. And despite battles happening all over the Mediterranean, the guy went all the way around with elephants, dude. Think about that. With elephants. Imagine you're a little Roman guy, about 5'6". That's actually pretty big for the time. About 5'4". You just got your Legionnaires kit. You're all kitted out for battle. And you start hearing talk around camp, around your military camp, of like, Hannibal and his contingent are crossing the Alps. They're coming from the north now. You're like, okay, that's pretty crazy. We've fought some guys before in trade disputes, and they usually had little boats, and they're on one little island. We go to the island, and we destroy them. That's been like the Roman book for so long. We beat them in open field combat. They do their little thing. We absolutely pincer maneuver them and crush them in open field combat. They write a treaty, and we make big bucks. That's basically been the Roman book. Now imagine you're hearing like, oh yeah, this guy's wiped out several of our forward expeditionary forces. Oh yeah, this guy's crossed this line. Oh, he's crossed another line. Oh, he's crossed this river. Oh, yeah, he's actually attacking on this side of the Mediterranean, but he's also coming from the north now. And it's like this mental game where the Roman army and the Roman citizens are like, wait a second, he did what now? He beat which general? Wait, what? It's kind of like playing a game of chess where you have twice as many pieces as the other guy, and then you start losing them at an alarming rate. And this guy's barely losing anything. You'll send 5 pieces to the right side of the board, and all of them disappear because of an ambush. It's that kind of thing. And then you have to factor in the sensory and experiential thing of seeing an elephant for the first time. What's the craziest fauna in Italy? I don't really know what they have. Birds? Some bovine animals? I don't know.
Probably.
I don't even think they have gators or anything like that. I can't recall that they have any large reptilians or anything like that. And then you see an elephant swaying over the horizon with huge sharpened tusks and battle regalia. It's a crazy thing. It's a crazy thing to have fought. Some of the worst losses in the entire history of the Roman Empire were at the hands of Hannibal Barca. The Battle of, and I pulled it up because I don't know how to say it, Trasimene, the Battle of Lake Trasimene was, some call it the worst ambush massacre of all time in conventional war. It still could hold that title today. That's up to the military historians, of course, but just to say, this little dude from Carthage put together an incredible war effort. Here's where I have to end this point, though. Despite his incredible success, despite how close he got to having a straight shot at the interior of the city of Rome itself, Rome's too big. They were literally too big to fail. This annoying gnat of a general who seemed to proliferate in different areas at different times like a ghost was still toppled by the sheer size, scale, and fortitude of the Roman legion. They just had too many bodies, too many men, and it was the easiest thing in the world for them to send a counterattack to Carthage directly while Hannibal was in the north, and it was game over. Hannibal had to come back, and he lost a horrible defeat at the gates of Carthage. And then they signed a second treaty that was even worse which led to the next Punic Wars, which were basically a rehashing of the first one. And actually, I don't remember if Hannibal's which Punic War. I think there was 3 where he did the elephant charge, but despite that, it was diminishing returns every time they tried, and Carthage got destroyed. I mean, not literally, but metaphorically destroyed. And also, it did get sacked, and they did kill a lot of people, and they did almost culturally genocide them. So yeah, Carthage did kind of get destroyed, actually, literally. But the Romans were not having it the second time around when Hannibal did his thing. And yeah, actually, that was completely false. Carthage was almost wiped off the face of the earth, but they were kept around because of trade, because it was too good of a position to give up the city of Carthage. So that's why their name is still in the history books, because Rome allowed it. So it just goes to show you, like, superior tactics, one of the most brilliant tacticians of all time, you're going to fall short of the endless empire of Rome. You just are. But one little tidbit that I like to tell people is, like, you know, Rome truly was scared. There's still some examples of this. There are propaganda bits from, like, pamphlets and different things that got around the Roman Empire during this time of them, like, demonizing Hannibal Barca to try to, you know, make use of propaganda to, like, encourage a fighting spirit among the ranks, you know, less intentions at home for the populace. But dude, it backfired. It completely backfired. Instead of being like, oh, this guy's like a little imp demon, he's, you know, an annoyance, he's going to be crushed underfoot by the Roman might. No, dude, people were, like, afraid. The propagandists, like, went way too far, and they characterized him as literally as a demon. And instead of people being like, oh, we'll take care of old Hannibal Barca, they were like, I am literally afraid that the demon form of Hannibal Barca is going to steal my children. Like, they had all these things about him drinking blood and, like, child sacrifice, and he's doing all these things, and, like, his elephants ran on the blood of his enemies and all this stuff. It did the opposite. So, like, it sowed dissension in the Roman ranks a little bit, and, like, they had to actually recall and tone down a lot of the stuff they were putting out about Hannibal, because it was, like, scaring the people back home. So just goes to show you, not every effort to demonize your enemies goes the way you think it's going to go.
Yeah. And I was going to say, to provide just some context to what you were saying for people to track it a little bit better, where you're saying, you know, for those that don't know a lot about this stuff or how stuff works in general when it comes to, like, a long march and why this was so significant, especially the first time. Obviously there's more than one of these wars, but why it was so significant the first time around. So when we're talking about he shows up in the north in the Alps, it's like, how did he get there? Carthage, you just said his city was in North Africa. He walked the coast from North Africa all the way to Spain, crossed the Strait of Gibraltar.
Fighting the entire way through, by the way.
And going through the entirety of Spain, the entirety of France, all the way to the top of the Alps. And we mentioned earlier just the scope of the empire that Rome was during this time. So it's not like an easy walk, like Connor said. There's Romans stationed everywhere. Just think of, like, it's kind of a weird example.
And their allies, too. And don't forget their allies, because they didn't just subjugate everybody completely. They had allies.
Yeah, just think of Rome in a very loose way, like the United States is today. And how the United States has bases all over the world.
Oh, interesting.
So just think that in the Roman times, they have bases all along the way that Hannibal's going to take, right? And the significance of this guy and why we're talking about him in the first aspect, just in general, why it was such a big deal that he made it to the Alps is, one, the Alps are, like, impenetrable at the time, right? There's no solid pathways. But just to think that someone who was a smaller force, better tactician with no supplies, he walked from North Africa all the way through Spain, through France, Switzerland, now modern day Switzerland, to the Alps, and then got through kind of tracking into Italy. That's the significance of it. He did this. He walked with his army. And normally when you have an army, you have a supply chain because your
lifeline. It's your lifeline back to your core.
Yeah. You have to eat, you have to drink, you have to be able to make shelter during weather, you have to be able to tend to people, animals, all this stuff. And basically it's like a large guerrilla warfare-esque thing. They just kind of take what they need. And that's the significance of it. So that's why we're talking about it. The other thing in my mind that needs to be, I think, mentioned in context and why this particular piece that Connor has chosen within the grand scope of the Roman Empire history, all the conflicts and the wars and everything that have occurred. And I think there were a lot of other people that got pretty close to destroying Rome. And I think a lot of that happened later. But so we're saying this is the height of Roman power. And I would argue that Carthage is the other big player in this realm. There's nobody else. It's Rome and it's Carthage.
One
the
nemesis,
Carthaginians
basically
had a pretty sizable empire as well. Rome identified that. They took it, which is why they had, like Connor said, the first treaty. Again, why is this all important? Because if Rome loses...
Oh, good point. Yeah.
If Rome does not win, if Rome doesn't last out Carthage, we're not having this episode. We're not talking about this because Rome would have essentially been destroyed and re-brought up in the image of Carthage.
Yeah. All boats sail to Carthage would be the euphemism we would say instead of all boats lead to Rome. Yeah.
So that's the significance. It's not just like, hey, I find this piece quite interesting, even though it is very interesting. It's if Rome does not succeed and win, then we don't talk about the Roman Empire the way we do because there's no Pax Romana, time era of great, like a Roman Renaissance, if you will. It doesn't exist because Rome gets destroyed 100 years earlier, or not 100 years earlier, 100 years into their Renaissance or whatever. Basically, you just erase half of Roman history on the back end with Carthage wins. That's why it's so important. That's the significance of it and why we're talking about it.
They were almost the world culture. They were this close. But to borrow a piece of wisdom from Ricky Bobby, if you ain't first, you're last. Like, that's basically what happened. Like, they ascended a huge percentage of what Rome was doing at the time. But they lost, so that becomes zero, basically.
Yes.
They're become a footnote almost.
And that's why it was, again, important to talk about why this person is so scary and why it mattered so much to the Roman people and the Roman military and their allies and everybody else, is because never in the history of Rome at the time had there ever been anybody organized enough to defeat Roman legions time and time and time again.
Yeah.
In such stunning fashion and like a shock and awe fashion. So that's why it's important. It's not just some random tidbit. It's very important because, like I said, I've said it
would have
5 times.
Changed.
It would have changed the landscape of
our
the
buildings
entire
of government.
World.
Our buildings of government would have a completely different aesthetic if Carthage won, because like all of our historical buildings and our various centers of government are all, well, not all, but a lot of them, they're either Greek or they're Roman. Half of them would have been Carthaginian, which
in truth was very similar because it had the Phoenician roots, but still it's weird. It's weird to think that the buildings around us today would look different based on
not only the buildings, the language,
our systems of law, our language. Yeah,
absolutely. Literally everything philosophy. That we know, the root basis of it would be different. It would be more, I'm not going to say like quite African culture, because like Connor was saying, the Phoenicians were like a Mediterranean,
Widespread.
European-y people. And Carthage just happened to be kind of the last bastion of them. But yeah, I mean, it's just everything is different. And I mean, it's kind of crazy to think about what the world would be like today without the Roman influence if they had lost. I mean, the dominoes fell into place for Rome and they didn't for Carthage. And that's just kind of how it is sometimes, as weird as that sounds, as dumb as that sounds, that if you think about the scope of history, literally was a coin flip. Just everything that we know, the basis and the foundation, you could flip a coin back in that day, and to the victor goes the world, basically. Yeah. Like, that's the scope we're talking about. It was literally a coin flip. A couple things went right for Rome, couple things went wrong for Hannibal, and that's why we have English and the buildings and our judicial system that we have today. Because of that. Because of literally a coin flip. So,
yeah,
I can't emphasize enough how important this little specific piece of history was. Because, like I said, many times,
Carthage could have been the center of the world. I mean, it's more likely they would have taken over Rome and renamed it New Carthage or something.
Yeah.
But Carthage could have very well became like, you know, one of the major cities of the developing world after that. Yeah, your point about expanding southward and that culture going into Africa, that's a little bit difficult because of the giant desert that's right below the northern coast before it gets to the rest of Africa. That desert is extremely hard to cross. It still is. There's still plenty of issues logistically with it today. But yeah, like the food we eat, you could spend literally the rest of your life thinking about all the ramifications that might have had. Speaking of ramifications, where's your head at?
Oh,
with the various elements of the culture. Hey, thank you.
That's an interesting. I was like, what? Where's he going with?
Yeah.
Huh? It caught me off guard a little bit.
Brilliant. Yeah, I rizzed you with ramifications.
Yeah.
Yeah. Agreed.
Yeah. I mean,
agreed. Wholesale. You could just say yes to that.
I did. I am. But so now that we have our victor, we have the world founder, if you will. You can start asking the question, well, why do you actually say the world founder, guys? What basis are you making to present that type of opinion and publish it? Well, since they are the victors, their culture continues to be able to live peacefully in the world, and we're talking right now, our language. The Romans basically created the Latin language. Again, that is a standardized language that everybody, obviously within Italy and Rome, spoke. But as the control, 200 years of this large empire of control, you're gonna learn the language. Mm-hmm. They have that type of learning for mainly the higher ups, but basically you learn Latin because that's your language. And why is that the basis of language in general? Because at least Western language, I guess I should specify when I'm talking about the foundational shape of the world, it's mainly the Western world, like Europe, mainly. Because obviously in the East, completely different. That's like Chinese, Japanese, Korean. They have their own thing kind of going on. So that's isolated until, I want to say, like the Silk Road.
Marco Polo.
Yeah, Marco Polo. So
that was just the beginning. Like it was really the Dutch. When the Dutch really got their trade routes established over water, that's when that became way, way wider open. But sorry, continue.
Right. So the scope of the Western world is shaped like, I want to say it's English, German, Spanish, Portuguese, and Catalan. At least 5 languages with Latin roots that you can track, that basically our language is tracked to Latin and comes from Latin. So that's 5 major languages. Just think about it. Like, English is considered the business language of the entire world now.
Yeah.
That, if you track back hard enough, is a Roman
not even that hard.
invention. Yeah. That Rome came up with Latin, so the business language of the world today has Roman origins. I want to say Spanish is what, the most widespread spoken language in the world, or one of.
Ooh, I feel like that's a trivia tidbit that I should know. Wait a sec. Keep talking. I'm going to go off fact check.
But, I mean, just think, like, Spanish is a massive language. Obviously, Spain and their conquest brought the Spanish language to a lot of other parts of the world. But, again, we're talking about the origin of their language comes from Rome. And I'm not to bash, like, oh, and I said German was the other, another one. And I think probably French. I mean, basically any modernistic language in today's world is probably Latin origin. Because I want to say, no, it's Spanish and Italian that are similar. Not French is kind of its own thing. So maybe not French. But basically what I'm trying to say is major languages across this world, especially English and Spanish, Roman origins. And just to think about the gravity of that, because I certainly haven't really thought about it in that sense until we decided to talk about this. And like I said, I like talking about things that are just going to turn the wheels, and I do it for myself too, which makes it interesting to talk about. So the height of the Roman power and the creation of the language to communicate with people, like you talked about the postal service, you have to have the same language, otherwise Tiberius is going to look at this sealed mark going into Gaul, which is modern day Germany, and he's got to deliver this thing, and if it's not in Latin and they don't speak Latin, it's going to return to sender, and that's a long 3 months.
It's a useless piece of paper. The postal service doesn't exist without standardized language.
Yeah,
for the most part.
So I mean, there's just so much that they have influence on. I just don't think we think about it. Language being a huge one within our society, and I think another one. I think we could just kind of go down a list of things. Again, we're talking in the scope of, I'm going to call it the Roman Renaissance, because that's just the easiest way to describe it in my mind. Yeah. Where you just have this
that's fair.
Long signature time of peace that you get to develop all this really cool stuff. You're not fighting anybody. You're not struggling.
You're not in like in an empire gripping war.
Basically, if you're not living on the fringe,
they're smashing fringe opponents.
Then you are reading about it in the Roman paper. I don't know, whatever. I mean, they had ways to share news, so.
Yeah, I'm not sure if they had. I know they had publications, but it was very, very, very limited, obviously, because it's pre-Gutenberg. But I'm not sure about that one either.
Yeah,
I don't know anything on this podcast. Just a couple things.
So yeah, I mean, I guess essentially not to like a publication, but I guess in my mind, the rich, high-class citizens all knew how to read and write, so they could get reports, and then they, I think, had speakers that would inform. They would have forums that would basically shout the news at people. So it's like modern day television. You, instead of turning it on, you're like, well, honey, I'm gonna go catch the news here at 4. I'm gonna walk down to the city center and catch the news. I'll let you know if I hear anything interesting, and
eat some pomegranate with the fellas.
Yeah, or if it's that
catch what the guy's yelling about in the square.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Life used to be perfect, man.
Yeah, hopefully they cut the crap on the series that they're doing right now about the rebels in Britain. I'm sick of that crap.
Ugh. Turn it off.
Bunch of druid hippie idiots, if you ask me.
Yeah.
But I digress. But I mean, joke aside, I believe that's kind of how they pushed information out. High class could read and write. You push it down, and then the oral history. Not oral history, but the oral news, basically. That's how the citizens kind of learned about stuff. But
sure, I buy that as fact. That's fact.
Yeah.
Bought and sold.
Right? Easy. Another one I find super interesting is the judicial system that Rome had. Which, again, is very similar to the modern day judicial system around the world now, for the most part. Obviously, there's wild cards out there that do it their own way. But I guess in general, when you think of the judiciary process, there's, the judge, jury, prosecution, evidence, all these things. Now, I'm not saying that Rome had all of those things, but they had a lot of them. They had, instead of a judge, they had a person of like high class of power, if you will. And it's not that far-fetched to say that judges today are not in a similar vein. They're not like, well, maybe some of them, I don't know, but you hold judges in high esteem in our society.
Yeah, you call them Your Honor.
Yeah.
Outside of office hours, too. Like, they're always Your Honor.
Yeah, it's the same. I mean, a high class Roman would hear a case as the judge. People would be chosen to hear the case, and evidence would be provided within that case against or for whatever party. Now, I don't know about prosecution, defense. I think it may have been more cut and dry, like high class person, people listening, and evidence presented probably by some sort of security faction. And basically it was probably more along the lines of, here's all the evidence that we've gathered against this person, so we can presume that what they're being accused of is true or false. Now, you guys deliberate on that, and then this guy's also listening, and then you share your opinion, and then, we'll kind of pass the public judgment along to this person, which was the Roman thought process of incorporating the public view and the public eye, and the importance of the public itself was not lost on Rome.
Yeah.
So that's why they kind of created this process, judiciary process. So it was, it is more fair than just saying like, hey, I saw this guy do this.
Judgment.
Kill that guy.
Yeah, get him out of here. Yeah, absolutely. And I'll add to that the process of pushing difficult cases up to a higher court, a Supreme Court. They didn't call it the Supreme Court at the time, but that also was inspired by the Greek process of law, but was really executed formally in the Roman Empire. Wasn't super common and was not like guaranteed to you. That I think they call them adjudicators. I don't know. That could be completely wrong. But these Roman citizens that had the power to judge, they did. I think like the main difference between, there's a lot, but the main difference between that system and the system we have today is that they could deliberate things in a day, because that guy did have the call. He could make the call on whatever the doling out of the punishment is and all that stuff. But it's like we plagiarized them openly. We were proud of it at the beginning of our country. We took a lot of the structural elements from Greek law, and we took a lot of the written elements from Roman law, and we weren't like shy about it. We were like, this is a good document because we are taking what we believe to be the best concepts from the Greek and Roman worlds and a couple other cultures. But like that, we were very clear about that at the outset of like our foundational documents in the United States. So it like had an insane amount of reverence. And like when you hear about like the sanctity of the law and like the Constitution's a perfectly written document, stuff like that, like that's not just people being ravenous patriots. Like that actually did come out of a previously established reverence for the Greek, physics and their way of doing law and the Roman law and like their structure. So that is where that's coming from. It wasn't always people just being like, we are the best. We're number one from the get-go. That it wasn't always like clearly like that. It was borrowed. That enthusiasm was borrowed from reverence of the Roman Empire. Well, Austin just adjusted his hair, dude.
I had to, yeah. But it's just like...
This is why you got to watch the visual episodes, guys. You missed Austin just have a complete Fabio moment. Now he's got a rooster tail on the back of his headset.
We're struggling.
He looks busted right now. I'm wearing a hat. I can't talk.
We're struggling. But I just think that's so crazy that a civilization from that long ago, from 2,000 years ago, is still in play today. And like some of these things are not, I would argue that they're not that far away from the original concept that they came from. Obviously, like the language one is different, right? It's completely different than Latin, and it's rooted. But you think of the judicial system, and it's like, okay, now we just pay more people to talk about the cases versus maybe the actual people defending themselves.
As a duty versus someone's job.
Yeah. Right. And we take longer to deliberate, and we're way less like killy. And like, that's it.
Killy? That took me a second to realize what you meant.
Yeah.
I was like, Achilles? What are you? Huh?
No. Like killy. Like
a million? Did you say, what'd you say?
Yeah, exactly. Killy.
Killy.
I mean, because we kind of still do it, like death penalty. But back in those days, they'd be like, yeah.
Still a bit of a savage world at that point. But like, well, that's the thing. The fact that there was some kind of due process, it wasn't super guaranteed. They were not considered inalienable rights as we might see them today. But like, even what they were doing was like radical justice at the time. Radical justice. Like the fact that you even had a hope that you could have someone advocate for you and it could be more or less talked out somewhat rationally versus whatever authority figure being like, off with his head. Like,
yeah,
that's pretty cool. It's cool to see, I don't know, a respect, I guess, for human life begin to emerge out of the legal system.
I think it's just the understanding of Roman higher ups at the time of controlling and showing that they are representative of the people, I guess you could say. They're not just like, we're up here, you're down there. Despite it being that way, it still is today, right? But we feel less of that because of elected leaders, of connection to real life events, things that affect us, what have you. But in that time, if you were just in a position of power and you're like, no, that guy's guilty, kill that guy, kill that kid, kill. Like,
yeah.
And enough of that happened to where it was to the point of people saying 65% of those people were innocent. And if you just looked at what was there, you would have got it right. Then, there's no, I said it again, I know. But there's no uprising. It's like the Romans understood how to, I hate to say the word control the public, but that's essentially what it is. They created enough of a civil system that the public was happy. They were provided with different things, necessities, if you will, in some cases, protection, all these different things. And in turn, they didn't essentially turn against the powerful figures that, lived in Rome. I said it again, that lived in Rome. And I just think to the movie Gladiator, which again, fictional movie, but the conceptual part of the part where I don't remember who it was, but telling Russell Crowe's character, control the crowd, control the people, control your destiny, you control Rome, basically.
I was going to bring that up.
It's basically Rome figured out how to do that in some essence during this Renaissance time, and the judicial system that they created was part of it. Obviously a standardized language so everyone could talk to each other is part of it. Another important piece, I think, as well, is the political system that I would argue is world famous. The Roman Republic, the concept of the Senate, the elected officials of certain sections of Rome and Italy and all these different things. But the Romans, I want to argue, kind of created the basis of the political system that we live on today. I know the Greeks and democracy, that's a very Greek thing.
Well, those were, those cultures, the Greeks got there first and influenced the Romans, but then there was a period where they were influencing each other quite a bit. So keep that in mind too.
I just think the concept of elected officials to represent public sectors so that their voices heard, in that context, it made sense to say ish.
That wasn't intentional. It did sound, your voice quality was different when you said that, It wasn't as like,
Yeah, I think I'm at like, I think I'm at like 6. Maybe I'm at 6. It did have some weight to it, but
I'll let you can have that one for free. Take that one off the counter.
Okay. I think I'm at like 5, but I just think the concept of that occurring to the level of similarity that it is today that we see in our own governments, whether it's Congress, House of Representatives, Parliament, whatever, almost every single country in the world, I say almost, has some sort of publicly elected officials that represent them, that go to a place, a forum, if you will, a Senate House, a forum, to discuss different issues that affect the public and how to resolve them. In theory, that's what
there is an asterisk. There is an asterisk we'll probably get to later. I do want to say, though, because Austin's bringing up some amazing points right now. If you're sitting at home or in the car or on the toilet, wherever you are right now, and you're thinking, this is really basic sounding. Yeah, they elected people to represent the rest of the people, and they talked about things rationally in an open debate. If that sounds basic to you, you got to understand, again, at the time, this is radical. This is pretty radical, with the exception of the Greeks, who did also have elements of this forum idea. Well, they started it, but this was not the way most of the world was doing justice at the time, or arguing larger laws that affected society. The system before that, and would continue around the world during the Roman Empire too, by the way, and other cultures, it was a coin flip. You either had a leader who had the best interests of the people in mind, or you didn't have one and your life was like really horrible. It was completely up to the quality and the integrity of the centralized authority figure that your culture happened to have. Now, you may be thinking, wait, wasn't Emperor Caligula like putting horses in the Senate? Nero was doing a bunch of weird stuff, and like dancing and playing the flute or something when Rome was burning. Yes, there were quite a few bad emperors of Rome that did have an overwhelming effect on the welfare of the people and the state of Rome. Yes. But if we're talking about averages and we're talking about certain periods, there was nothing like the legal precedents set forth by Rome at the time. Like, truly a source of discussion around the world when people heard about, okay, what's happening in the heart of Rome. It was kind of a place of myth almost. And a lot of that myth gets attributed to the military and all these things they're doing, all these buildings they're creating, all this architecture and art and poems. But at the time, the rest of the world was also marveling at how they ran their government because it was kind of weird. It was foreign to them. So, while not very particularly maybe interesting to us today, it's of interest to us because it hadn't been seen before. These basic things that we enjoy nowadays were a rarity. It was exotic at the time. Some elements of it were exotic at the time. If you had anything like that at the time and you're another culture, it was because you had, again, that coin flip leader who wanted to, bend the ear of the common man and wanted to hear what you had to say. But but there was no guarantee. There was no precedent set that you would have that unless you lived in Rome and you were of a high enough class to deserve that. Keep in mind, there was an underclass that had none of these protections at all. So there was still strata to society. In the bottom couple strata, there was a slave class. There was an underling service class that really didn't enjoy any of this. But for what we can equate to like their middle class and above, they did have that.
And I think it's important to emphasize what you said of basically none of the stuff that we're talking about existed ever. This is the first time it's really been brought forth in a meaningful manner and has been documented to work at a large scale empire level, which, like you said, is far-fetched and doesn't exist until now. So
statecraft. I just think the idea of statecraft, that's another invention of Rome, essentially.
You're right.
Is when your borders get so big, coming up with ways to manage that involves your laws, it involves your regulations, it involves how you run society. And like you brought up Gladiator, really quickly, I just want to say, sports, professional sports, that was an element of statecraft. Our concept, and like what eventually became football and soccer and whatever else. Guys, professional sports, that was also, as we understand them today, other cultures had sports too, but professional sports as we understand them today as a bit of reprieve and solace for the masses, that's statecraft. That came from Rome. The Colosseum, wonderful, cool, genuinely loved by people, but also was a brilliant way to basically have a little bit of a suppressant on an otherwise teeming, chaotic mass of people in your huge empire that needed distractions. That's kind of why they exist. And guess what? Football, which is a gladiatorial sport in a sense, does that for us today still, as do esports and everything else. But if you study communications, you're going to be studying the Roman Empire quite a bit because a lot of mass communication concepts and a lot of propaganda concepts come from Rome because they had to learn all these lessons in real time. Otherwise, their empire would have fallen apart. Bada bing.
Just a standardization of laws and rules that I think the thing that Rome did really well too was realize that they are the dominant power, but that doesn't mean that they need to completely dominate these other cultures. They kind of let them exist within themselves and didn't necessarily persecute or destroy or overly influence directly influence, I'll say, because I think there was indirect influence just from being assimilated into the Roman culture that, I mean, over 200 years, your city, state, town, whatever gets invaded by the Romans. They don't slaughter everybody. They say, hey, we're going to be in charge now, but you guys kind of do what you want to do. We just have a certain set of rules you need to follow within our scope. And these are if you prove that you are capable of being, I hate to say like docile or obedient, but I guess agreeable to our rules, then we will start the process of including you into our state, and that gives you benefits.
Social contract.
Which also, you know, I said it again, but taxes and what have you, the types of things that basically help a large empire, nation, etc. run, you're going to be subjugated to those things, but because you're doing that, we will give you a guarantee on shelter, supplies, the ability to travel, security being probably one of the biggest things at that time. And I just think it's so hard to really just grasp that concept that all these things that I feel like I'm saying that exist in today's world are literally coming from one singular place. They had it figured out to a certain degree. Now, before we get carried away or, you know, I keep saying it. Before we continue onward, obviously the Roman Empire fell. Connor was pointing out there's a couple guys. There's multiple guys, a ton of them. Rome never got it down pat with all the checks and balances to the point where crazy people in power could be overruled and controlled by a governing body. Essentially, crazy people in power, since that had always been the de facto power structure for most of the world, including Rome, that's kind of how the dissolve of the Republic happened, and then the monarchy of the emperor came up again, which led to the fall. But basically, they still created all of this stuff, and they still had 200 plus years of it working
at like a high capacity.
Yes.
Both previous to and for a time after also was working. Not amazingly well as the Pax Romana, but it was continuous government.
Right. And I just think from that standpoint alone, it's incredible that one culture has shaped the world again. In that sense, it's just incredible to think about, which we go back to Connor's earlier talking points. If Rome doesn't succeed against Hannibal, we're not talking about any of this because it would have been completely different. It may not have existed. Who knows? Maybe Carthage doesn't come up with this governing system and they collapse soon after, and then the world's just thrown into the dark. Like, I don't know. It's crazy to think about that. Coin flips like that, and you can track it across history, if you will, but they just decide and shape the future of human society. Is just incredible to think about.
We'd be eating Hannibal salad instead of Caesar salad.
Oh, okay. I was like, is that a metaphor or something? Like, what? Huh?
Dude, the look on your face, you're like, we did not prepare Hannibal salad. What is Hannibal salad? What are you talking about, dude? You're embarrassing me on the pod.
Is that a metaphor that I'm missing? Is that like a code?
No, it was just it was an incredibly erudite insight that I just made off the cuff about the state of salads if Carthage won. Wait, really fast, I want to say, obviously the Greeks contributed a ton to professional sports. Their influence was more so the sporting part of sports. I'm saying the mass media and influence part of sports on behalf of the Romans. I want to make that very clear. Greeks are the OGs when it comes to pro sports. Romans just added the mass media portion of it. Thank you. Good night.
I think it's an important point, not only what you just said about sports and Greeks, but a lot of these concepts in general could probably be argued not original Roman ideals or ideas.
Oh, not a ton of them aren't.
But the fact that they were able, again, I think I said it earlier, to apply them to an empire size
scope,
and then continue to run it effectively for hundreds and hundreds of years is why we're talking about them versus other people.
Yeah.
Other cultures, I guess I should say. They were just able to apply it so effectively that here we are today.
Yeah.
And I think that's another good causeway or a good road to talk about some other aspects. I know, dude, I'm crazy. I am out of control right now.
I'm Walter Cronkite? Jesus Christ.
In the zone, man. But Connor, you mentioned it earlier, the architecture aspect of it, which I think was militarily driven for the most part. You have to have really cool shit that is sturdy and can last a long time if you're going to last as long as they did. And some of their engineers...
Oh, you mean like building materials, like their like Roman concrete?
Their ability to build, their ability to take that understanding of probably building military structures and applying it to a civilian capacity, and then their understanding of construction. I mean, we get... The Greeks are credited with the columns, like columnar architecture, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
But the Romans refined it and made it more artistic and a staple that is seen today, like you said. The invention of roads, while we mentioned in our last podcast, the highway system was a Nazi Germany thing. The concept of roads in general was a Roman thing. And ironically enough, I talked about it earlier when the Phoenicians were mentioned. This little ride in Epcot at Disney World credits the Romans for linking the world with their roadways. I already knew that before this ride.
99% of our info comes from the rides at Epcot.
Nobody make fun of me. And nobody think that I know this stuff because I've ridden this ride at Epcot a lot. I already knew this before. I just think...
Sure, dude.
I just think it's important to mention...
Hi, Phyllis. This is Mickey Mouse. Welcome to Epcot. Did you know the Phoenicians almost made the first postal service, but they were wiped out and outcompeted by the Romans?
I'm so sorry. We're getting a little too goofy. He's leaving. He's gone. He's out of there, dude. He's done. I killed Austin. I broke his spirit. Look at him. Look at his face. He's sighing. I just saw you go through this every stage of grief twice. That was wild.
Really, that was actually amazing what you just did there.
You're welcome.
But
you're welcome for that.
The reason I keep bringing that part up is a place like Disney World where people that don't give a shit about any of this conceptually to this depth, they're learning this in a ride. They're learning about the Romans creating roadways that impact the world. It's just like the tiniest little fraction of what they contributed to today's society, but that's their impact. They're in a ride. They're part of a ride in Disney World, which is arguably one of the biggest corporate businesses, entertainment, media, whatever, in the world. One of the most recognizable, if not the most recognizable brand on this planet, talks about the Roman Empire in one of its rides. Which
I would need to be fact checked on this. I'm pretty sure Walt Disney was like
a Romophile. I think I'm pretty sure he was like obsessed with Rome, if I remember correctly, which is why a lot of his original ideas for the park were like incredibly Roman themed. But I could be talking out of my butt. Walt Disney Romophile?
I don't know about the Romophile part, but it wouldn't surprise me if he looked at Rome and said, this society is advanced and futuristic for their time with what they're doing. And that's what I want to do for our society. So less of, I'm obsessed with Rome, I want to make everything Roman, and more of the conceptual idea of Rome pushed forward so hard and founded so much for us that I also want to do that with the idea of Epcot being a futuristic, almost utopian society. That
was his original idea
for Epcot. Yeah, if you ever go to Disney World and you're in Epcot, you'll be able to see. I think there's multiple different places that you can see like his concept for Epcot, what it was, and they created a theme park instead. But his idea was obviously probably a lot harder to do. But I wouldn't be surprised if that was inspired by a Roman origin of how advanced they were within their good golden years, I would say, and how forward thinking they were. And we talk about the architecture, columns, arches, I believe is what the Romans are credited with. A lot more effective than the Greek arches. So they were more stable and had better construction.
Well, they weren't pressure-mounted arches. A lot of cultures that had arches predating this era had pressure-mounted, so held together by math, physics. Like the way stones were arranged to lean against each other. Roman concrete was strong enough structurally to make what I would call a true arch, which was a formed arch rather than several different types of archways that preceded it. I'm glad you brought up the concrete, because this is one area that I do want to challenge the Roman myth just a little bit. So Roman concrete is legendary because all of their structures are still around. Most of them that weren't directly impacted by war or fires, whatever, are still around. The aqueducts, the Colosseum, and they're in pretty good shape. What we've realized about Roman concrete is that it seems to have a bit of a self-healing property, in that when there's cracks and fissures because of something to do with the moisture content. Look, guys, I don't know the details of the engineering. Basically, it has a degree of malleability while still remaining very strong to sort of self-correct over the years. And a lot of people have taken this, I think, to a level that's maybe just too high when they talk about the significance. Yes, for the time and for eons afterwards, that level of concrete and engineering is insane. It's insane. And it still outcompetes many modernized civilizations today that make things pretty poorly. And I think that's why it gets compared to that all the time, because we see concrete structures and modern buildings fall apart all the time. Here's the issue with that. Most of our modern buildings and constructions that do fall apart, whether it's like from tornadoes or earthquakes, it's a budgetary thing. It's mainly a budgetary thing. We have concretes and alloys and things that will outlast our planet. We can make them really well nowadays. It's not so much that we haven't been able to uncover the secrets of Roman engineering when it comes to concrete. It's that because we live in the society that we live in, we've grown to entrust our money into other things besides, perpetuity and legacy. That's not really a focus of modern buildings for the most part. Most of the time, we're making concrete just to get it out, just to build roads quickly, yada, 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 with this planned deprecation that we will eventually repair and fix or replace with new concrete. So I want to put that out there, because if you look up Roman concrete right now, it'll be like the most mythical substance ever created. And there's like a 4 a.m. History Channel show that's probably like, Roman concrete, was it made by aliens? Like stuff like that. And I just want to say they were geniuses. And I would even say comparatively, relative to builders today, they were probably more skilled. But in terms of the structural integrity of the concrete, guys, it's not that mythical. It's pretty crazy. It's fairly crazy, but it's not at the level that some people ascribe to it. I just want to get that out there. Okay? We all love the Romans.
That makes sense to me.
Some people went a little too crazy on the concrete thing.
It makes sense that today's world we would opt for more efficient, which means cheaper options.
Yeah.
Versus something like the Romans did that were probably just like, hey, we need to make this last forever because we'll be here forever kind of a thing.
And our legacy will reign forever.
And we want to do this once. Yeah. And I'm sure they made repairs themselves. But yeah, the scope of engineering feats that the concepts that they had for design and the understanding of architecture and stuff like that is incredible. And I think one of my favorite things to tell people is I learned this when I was in Italy. I've been to Rome. I will say I've been there. I've seen Inner Rome. Right. It is incredible. It is crazy. I've walked on the original stone steps from, I think it's the Palatine Hill down. It's the Senate walk down to the Forum where the Senate house was. Dude. So the likes of Roman senators, Julius Caesar, all these different people. Some of the stones are still the original that are there, which is crazy to think about. And I think one of my favorite things, to your point of professional sports, the Colosseum, we all know what it was for, what they did. They had gladiator fights, they had sea battles, they had mechanisms and elevators underneath that they could shift the floor and the structure and the design of the Colosseum to create different battlefields and whatever. I think one of the coolest, like, subtle designs of the Colosseum, I think it could hold... Dog chiming in.
I didn't even hear her.
Oh, good.
Your mic didn't pick it up, at least not over Discord.
Oh.
Well, there she is. Okay, yeah. I heard that one.
But
wrap it up, Dad.
Right. Conceptually speaking, the subtle, cool thing about the Colosseum, I think it could hold about 50,000 people-ish.
That's so big. For a site of antiquity, that's insanely huge. Sorry, continue.
I think they were obviously like packed in there. But the thing that blows my mind is the Romans designed and created the Colosseum in such a way that it could hold 50,000 people. And when the event was done, the entire Colosseum could be emptied in 10 minutes because of the engineering, the design, the
just
exits,
the layout of like
the layouts.
Exits?
Yeah, the layout of the layout of the Colosseum and how they structured it with different exits and stairs and pathways. Like they could empty the Colosseum of 50,000 people in 10 minutes. It's the most efficient thing that's ever been created. Obviously, we can't do that today. Our stadiums hold many more people, also, and they can exit.
The context.
They can empty roads. pretty
we don't easily, have walkable communities anymore, really. Yeah.
Right, but 10 minutes, 50,000 people, 10 minutes, Coliseum's empty. I think that's something that I learned. I learned that over there from tour guides and I went inside the Coliseum, and that's something that they talked about. Whether or not you knew that they could shift the floors and they had elevators and things underneath that they could just bring people up and change and all this stuff. Like that was all real. And yeah, I mean, when you are in the Coliseum and you walk around it, it makes sense. When you're looking at it, it seems like it has a lot of exits, but obviously the efficiency part of it is not just, let's put as many exits as we can in this place and it'll empty out. There has to be
that's tough.
Design of some kind, and they did it. And like I said, it's a cool little subtle fact that's
a whole area of study. Traffic, like both in like human bodies, but also cars, getting flow out of an area. Like I don't know, that must have taken a lot of pretty specific study and thinking. It's weird because there's no world where they're like studying, oh, what are the other Colosseums and other cities doing? How can we improve on that? Because there is none. They just did it. I mean, there were bigger buildings, I guess, in Alexandria and things like that, but not to that scale and not for that reason. Also, parallel to the Colosseum, guess what also came around that same time? Fast food.
Huh.
The Romans invented fast food.
Nice.
Portable carts, portable cooking, like mobile carts to push around. Like, they were slinging hot dogs. Get your hot doggy. While a guy's getting eaten by a lion. Like, that's... Okay, hold up. Gladiators didn't really die that often, guys. They did die, but usually when they died, it was either a well-known match between people who legitimately had beef, or it was an accident. They really, really tried not to kill gladiators. The whole thing about like turning the thumb up or down, that was usually part of... It had more in common with like a play. If someone were to be executed, they usually weren't really executed. But there were sporting battles, and there were people who were not fighting on a script of any kind. But they would fight generally till someone surrendered. Some of them were slaves as depicted in some media. Some of them were indentured or, were contractually obligated to spend the rest of their life doing this. But a lot of them, and even some of the former category I just mentioned, were professional athletes. With investment in time and training, they were fed well, some of them. So they really didn't want to kill these guys because they were... printing presses for, the Colosseum wasn't always paid for. There was a great period of time where it was free. But they were hugely impactful for the state of the populace, their popularity directly translated to the popularity of the emperor and, things like that. So... all of this to say they were very important, and they weren't slaying each other on the regs. Although they did die. They definitely died. But there's another little thing I wanted to temper because I've seen that floating around a lot. Also, if someone were to be executed, the prevailing theory is that it would be a thumbs up, not a thumbs down. But
that's
also
cool.
They gave us thumbs up. That was them.
Nice. That makes sense with the gladiators. It's progressing the narrative of the professional sports angle. Gladiators were basically the athletes. I'm sure they were very well known in society, and you could probably track their rise through the different arenas that were held across their empire. And the Colosseum is the Super Bowl, basically.
Pretty much.
Of where you can play. If you make it there, you're in the big time, so
big business, baby.
That makes sense. It makes sense to me that would exist in that way for the gladiators, and they weren't actually killed as constantly as they're made out to be. At least probably not the really popular ones or the ones that actually made it to Rome and were mainstays. I'm sure they killed a lot of people. The gladiators themselves killed lesser people a lot. And yeah, I'm sure the big fights between each other may have more been not staged, but not...
The big battles were. The big battles where they had tons of time invested into like the sea battles, for instance, and any recreations of like ancient Greek wars or anything like that, those typically were like pretty staged. Probably the minute details of how people are interacting with each other is up to the performer, but the wide decision making was staged.
Like I said, that it makes sense to me because you don't want to kill the best people, then you won't get crowds, and the crowds control. With the crowd, you control everything else. So, it makes sense to me that would be that way. So, essentially, the answer to the question that started this episode of how often do you think of the Roman Empire, the answer to that question is everybody thinks about the Roman Empire every single day. If you talk, if you are involved or listen to or think about or live within a political system. Same thing with the judiciary system. You use roads, architecture, or enjoy sports.
Or have been involved in a lawsuit.
Or any of that stuff. If you do any of that,
sorry,
you think of the Roman Empire, because we get all of these things. Basically, we get everything that we have. It can be traced back to the Romans. So really the answer, it's not really even a meme. It's boring, because the answer is, we think about it.
Everybody does subconsciously.
All the time, whether you know it or not, because of the existence of what they were doing. So I guess it's only a meme because people don't know about this kind of a thing. But maybe whoever pushed this forward was like, I don't know, subtly.
Well, they probably had, it was probably, my guess is it's a situation like we have with our significant others. We're not the coolest guys on the block, because we're often doing extremely dorky things. I feel like we have a higher than average propensity to spurt off some Roman legion stuff or something. So, I mean, case in point, I made shirts for his bachelor party that had crossed gladiat on the back, which is the short sword of the Roman legion, the gladius. That was the logo for his bachelor party. So I feel like it was probably one of those situations where they were like, I'm so annoyed by you bringing up first of all, honey, you're literally not a legionnaire. Stop acting like one and dressing up like one. Hey, it's fun. What can I say?
The Roman Empire is cool stuff.
Are we going to talk about whether or not the Roman Empire still exists, or is this a topic because I feel like it's too much?
Well, to
tack on here. Maybe tease it. Maybe tease it a little bit, Austin. Tease it up.
Well, let's see if we're on the same page here. So, obviously, within history, the Roman Empire falls. It no longer exists. It
fractures and then
dissipates.
It
was turned into
East and West
with Constantinople. Right? Yeah, Constantinople, the Holy Roman Empire, which became the Byzantine Empire, which became the Turks eventually because of the takeover, and then Rome fell. Western Rome just fell because it fell, and then it slowly pieced itself together as a normal Italian society, I guess you could say. So the Roman Empire is gone. Or is it? So maybe you know, maybe you don't, maybe you haven't thought about it before, but there's this, basically, I don't want to call it it's a country. It's its own country. It's the smallest country in the world, one of, that sits inside Rome, that contains tremendous wealth, power. It holds a lot of the world's secrets and wealth, and that is Vatican City.
The Vati, bro.
The Catholic city-state, if you will. And
that's a good way to put it. Yeah.
And I'm Catholic, so I mean, I'm not trying to demonize it by any means, but I'm glad that you kind of understood where I was going with this. That essentially, there are things out there that say that the Roman Empire didn't actually get destroyed. It just assimilated, morphed, whatever, itself into the Vatican and paired itself with the Catholic faith.
I think it's less of people calling it... I think people tend to ascribe, again, a little bit too much to their credit. Instead of it being like, oh, they were just morphing to the demands of a more modern world, and they're choosing a different theater of war. It's less physical and more of the spirit or something. I don't know about that. I would say it was an amazing effort to consolidate what was a plummeting culture. I think that maybe somewhere in that middle ground might be more in line with what really truly happened, if we could even describe the Vatican that way. Because it is a remarkable place, as I've been told. I've never been, but
I've been. It is crazy And
right.
It's really also what makes it crazy is the things that you can't see, that you just hear about. The wealth, the flow of information to and from, and also the secrets. It contains like the secrets of the world, allegedly, in the library and the archives. And you have to be escorted in and out. You have to know exactly what you're supposed to get from the section. You can't browse. Like, they have, I'm pretty sure it's well documented that they have like this grand scope of human knowledge that, if you think about it, would have been accumulated by a said Roman Empire that basically ruled the known world at this time. And where did all that go? Where did, what, 1,000 years less? I don't know, roughly 1,000 years. Where did that accumulation of wealth, knowledge, history, all these things, where did it go? People say it went to the Vatican, which it has a lot of stuff. And I think what's also important and interesting is Rome also controlled Alexandria at the time of the Great Library of Alexandria. And while a lot of things, yes, they were truly lost in that fire, Rome had access to it for longer than just like a couple days.
Somebody had a priority sheet, I feel like. Somebody must have been like, I got to get these 5 things out of the thousands of things that are here. I would totally buy that. Sure.
I mean, so it's just an interesting thought and theory to kind of wrap things up with, I guess, because...
Join us sometime in the future for the deep dive, for the Dweeb Dive.
I don't even know...
And the secrets of the Catholic faith.
Which will be interesting for me to navigate because I am an active and practicing Catholic. So...
Yeah.
That'll be interesting. But I think it's, fair to say that these two things can also coexist and happen. So, it's literally it's a fact that the Vatican holds all these secrets of human knowledge and history. So, I guess it's not like a far-fetched
thing. If I can recommend a book
known.
series, if you're interested, by the way, Austin showed me this book series a while ago, but if you're interested in like secrets of antiquity and like the ancient world and how those through lines have like come into the modern day, and then you mix in a little bit of spy, action, thriller, a little bit of science, that kind of thing. The book series that starts with Map of Bones. What's that called?
Oh, it's the Sigma Force novels by...
The Sigma Force novels.
James Rollins, I believe.
Fascinating. Oh
yes.
My God. They're so cool. Even if you're not buying what Rollins is putting down, the story itself is fantastic. The references he makes are based on a lot of research. Now, you can pick apart his research all you want, but at the very least, the story and like the vibe he puts together, oh my goodness. If you have any interest, if you like fiction and you have any interest in the ancient churches and all that stuff, dude, whoa. That's one of the best book recommendations I've gotten in a long time.
And
there's a lot of them.
There are a lot of them. He keeps making more, which is incredible. He actually has sections in his book where he talks about certain things.
The appendix is like
that he brings up, and he's like, this is actually true. This place exists. This concept existed. This was real. And then he's like,
also the technology that they use, like there was water-based armor that created like a water film over you that a character was wearing in a fight scene. It turns out that was real, that they actually made that. It was just too costly to like mass produce. And there were some issues with it, but like, there you go. Anyway.
Yeah. He deciphers in his book the fact from the fiction, and that part in itself is actually crazy because you're like, okay, this is made up and this sounds real, and then it's like the other way around, and you're like, oh, wait a minute, that's actually kind of weird and crazy. But to Connor's point, it stems a lot of different areas of history, and science. It's a military element. It's got a lot of different stuff for a lot of different people. It's truly fascinating and very interesting. It goes to, like Connor said, the church.
Lots of places.
It talks about
Greece,
the Nazis and what they were doing in like Nepal and the Himalayas and all that stuff.
Masons.
The Masons.
All of the check boxes that you would want to get hit by a book series like that, he does. Yeah. He gets it. He hits it.
And you can, there's not really an order to them. You could literally pick one up and read whenever. There is a slight continuity of characters or continuity, whatever, of the characters. So like you'll read one book and like one of the characters has like a prosthetic, really cool arm. And then I think 2 books later I was reading and he had his real arm and I found out how he lost it and how he got this new one. So, but it's not like a groundbreaking.
I would recommend reading the first one. Somewhat.
It helps. It helps track the characters a little bit in some instances, but you don't have to, which makes it nice.
Thanks to James Rollins for sponsoring Dweeb Dive. Yeah. I'm just kidding. I'm just joking. No, we are obviously not sponsored. We just really, really like these books. You guys got a book recommendation? You learned a couple little titillating facts, I hope, about the Roman Empire. Maybe something to chew on there. I don't know what else we can offer our listeners, Austin. What do you think?
I'm with you. I think the answer to the question of how often you think about the Roman Empire, I think we nailed it. It's all the time. That's the trick.
Every day.
Every single day, every single hour, every single minute.
Every second, bro.
It's true.
Well, guys, if you have any questions, ideas, if you want us to talk about something, if you thought we said some stupid stuff, which we probably did, don't hold that inside. Don't let it fester. Comment. Talk to us. We'd love to open the discussion with you guys. It's literally our favorite thing in the world. And we're always looking for interesting topics to dive into. We'll do anything at any time. So, well, that's super not true. I probably wouldn't talk about rice farming techniques, I'll be honest. Actually, I probably would, as my heritage would force me to. But guys, it's been our absolute pleasure. Austin, do you have any parting words?
Nope. Thanks for listening, and I hope you guys continue to dive into these topics yourselves if they're interesting. And if you haven't done that yet, just wait. We've got tons and tons and tons more that maybe will find your fancy.
All right. See you next time.